Welcome to our program. Welcome to our YouTube. Welcome to our presentation and sharing with each other.
Thank
So,
you, Stephen.
um, I guess a fundamental question is for both of us that we can answer directly, taking turns, kind of, I guess, prompting each other with certain kinds of interested points. Was you did go, um, you were a student in college, correct?
Yes.
So you maybe you can just talk about what major you had at the time and maybe from the major that might have been different or the same as the arts, you'll have to say it. You can then talk about maybe why you gravitated into the arts, and you can talk about if you did go into the arts, what prompted you, and also what materials did you use initially?
Very good. Thank you, Stephen. When I went to school, uh, well, as I mentioned earlier, I had been introduced to the arts much earlier through my family. But when I went to school, I was very much caught up into the current political situation, and I went into a field of study called the peace studies. And I went in, I'm going to repeat because that was awkward. I went into a field of study called peace studies, and it was a spinoff from the 60s when the country was in very much political turmoil. And I was really kind of coming of age at that point, realizing everything that was going on politically, and I was very interested in it and decided to uh, focus on it at the time. And it wasn't until after going to school and then going to the Peace Corps and really opening up my horizons as a person, coming back, and I, at that point in time, as I readjusted to coming back to the States, that's when I started to delve into the arts. But that really was my starting point. Can you identify what? I know you went to school too, Stephen.
Right. Let me
Yeah,
just stay with one thing. Why,
yeah.
when you say you went to the arts, why did you choose the visual arts? You could have been a musician, you could have been a dancer, uh, you, you could have, but what I guess impressed you, motivated you to develop that passion to go into the visual arts, the
I
visual.
appreciate that, and your compliment in terms of recognizing that I could be multi-talented in that way. Uh, but well, I was early on in my life. I was a fairly quiet. I was introverted, really. That continued on for really many years, and um, the idea of doing other art forms wasn't appealing. But um, I had just scratched the surface of doing some visual arts when I was younger, and my mother was very much into the visual arts, and that was kind of all around me. And it seemed like a very natural form of expression to me to turn to, and very healing. I mean, at the time, I was trying to readjust to the U.S. society after being away for a couple years and in a very, very different culture. And I had uh, pretty much assimilated being in that culture. I had learned some of the language and so forth, but it was not an easy shift for me to come back and try to get adjusted to everything that was going on here in our country and the
Right.
fast pace.
So let me, forgive
Yeah.
me for interrupting. So,
Oh,
um, what messages, when you say that your mom was involved in the creative world of making drawings or paintings, what messages did she give you about what she was trying to achieve?
well, at the time I was growing up, she wasn't actively involved in actually making art. However, her whole, I'm going to cut this part out. But what she did do was very significant was that she surrounded us, particularly me, because she saw that I did have some interest with art materials, visits to galleries, museums, yeah, magazines.
And she would take you to the galleries and the museums
Yes.
with you and your brothers or with the whole family.
Yeah, the whole family went. The whole family went. Um, and this was frequent. We went frequently. And she was very animated, when we got there, showing us things. And um, I remember just being a kid, very young though, in those situations. But as I look back, I also know that at the time I was looking at the art and I was enamored with what the artists had done with their abilities. How they came up with these pictures was amazing to me. Uh, but I think what that had done for me when I did come back from being overseas was that it was something I turned to quite naturally to explore, develop. And I started out with primarily watercolors at the time.
Did you do drawing sketches first in pencil before you went into watercolors? I mean, did you, through observation, through copying things, did you get, I guess, preoccupied with making sketches for things before you became curious about going into the watercolors?
Uh, no, I had a number of art books that um, my mother and had given me,
Hmm.
and I looked through some of the images and found some that intrigued me, resonated with me, and I copied them.
What kind of art books did she
They were
show you?
instructional primarily,
Hmm.
instructional art books,
Right.
and uh, they one in particular was um, very instructive as far as breaking down step by step what to do, and
With
had
what?
some
With what, Eric? I'm sorry.
oh,
Step by
it's okay.
step.
Yeah, of what to do, how to approach things, how to approach, applying the watercolor to the paper. Um, and there was some drawing involved, as I remember now. At that time, there was some drawing involved. It wasn't extensive, but um, creating the composition, and I did do that in some of the very first what I would consider successful at that time. I was mostly aiming for realistic images because I wasn't really familiar with more abstract or how appealing those could be.
Right.
And yeah,
So let me keep on interjecting. So I'm sorry for being maybe distracting with at times cutting you off. When you talk about you were busy trying to make compositions, it's a word, but what did it mean that you learned that word composition? What did that mean?
placing uh, components of the image on the page in such a way that it was an appealing, it was appealing to the eye. The image was balanced. The image had focal points, areas that drew your eye in, other areas that were more, excuse me, more left open, and also too, color played a part, as I remember, in the compositions to highlight certain areas, other areas less developed, and that was very appealing at the time. I was able to you, create subjects that I was interested in. Um, I remember one specific piece that I actually framed. I still have it today. That's framed piece of a building that has a almost like a silo type part of the building that goes up into the air. It wasn't a lighthouse. It could have been, um, and there were birds in the air around it. Kind of a light colored sky. It wasn't that difficult of a composition, but it was meaningful to me and something that when I had applied the watercolor, it did, fairly decent job of bringing it to life. And it was an accomplishment for me at the time.
But why did you choose watercolor?
I think watercolor was very appealing to me because it seemed like a beginner's medium for one thing. It just, as kids, we used to use those watercolors that came in a strip form,
Hmm.
little wells filled with different colors.
Sure. Those
Yeah,
little crayon plastic paint sets.
right. And you
Yeah.
could muddy up the colors really fast.
Yeah.
But and there was I knew that my mother, I knew my grandparents used that medium very effectively.
So your grandparents were also involved in the,
Yes,
okay. Fascinating.
yeah. And I had I still do, um, a picture that he created, a painting of our cottage up in close to Syracuse.
Hmm. You say
Yeah,
he, you mean your grandfather?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. My grandfather, he used to do quite a few watercolors, and I would see him um, at work occasionally, not very often, but I did see him at work occasionally.
So one of the first painting mediums that you experimented with, what age are we talking about?
At that time, I was probably 22.
A very
Yeah,
experimental age.
yeah.
Um, and how did you approach it? Did you make a sketch first in pencil and then fill it in, or did you just use the brush with the watercolor and let it just, you applied your paints with the water and you just let it happen spontaneously without planning anything. You just move the brush and see where it went.
At that time, I remember I did make a sketch first,
Mm,
and the paper I was using, I don't know why I remember this, but I do, was forgiving enough if I could erase a little, though I already knew that you couldn't do too much erasure with watercolor to it could affect the paper and how the paint was received into the paper. The Yeah, there was definitely a sketch there first, and applied some washes, and then went back in and applied some other colors to embellish it. Yeah.
and the images that you created with the watercolor, were they very, very highlighted with contrast, or were they very, very subtle, kind of hazy and soft colors, or were they combination of very intense colors and very, very light colors? What do you
In
remember?
the beginning, they were quite soft images, some contrast, but not, I know with watercolor, if you spend some time with it, you could really get some bright colors and images, but they were quite subtle at that time.
Why I pick up on that, Eric, is that in your making these very soft images with color, it could be a sign that you are not yet totally feeling confident about how to play with the watercolor to get all the different variations of tone and shadow and contrast. And so you started out light in a certain kind of a hesitant way. Is that true?
Yeah, very much so. Um, and you bring up a good point because as time went on, and um, actually, my wife gave me a book on experimenting with watercolors. And that involved a lot of experimenting in abstractions
Hmm.
and letting the paint drip, and yeah, a lot of different types of experiments were set up in that book, and I love that book, and I so enjoy doing the experiments, and some of them turned out to be some of my best, what I would consider my best works at the time. Um, and I started to do things like drip, uh, glue. It was removable glue
Hmm.
uh, onto the surface, and then create the watercolor on top of it. And then after it dried, you could remove the glue, and the it would leave a white space. And some of the white spaces it left, if you dripped it in such a way that it would create a design on the paper. And I still have a sample of that. It
Oh,
was
we'd
quite
love to see it one time. Sure.
yeah, yeah.
Maybe you can, next session, if you still can find it, just take it out as an example of something that you're explaining right now, and maybe we can actually see in practice how it evolved.
Yeah, yeah, I'd really like to do that. There's a quick little funny story about that painting. Was that I had it set up in the house, and my uh, nephew had come over with his family, and he was standing in front of it, and he said, "That looks like a Paul Clay."
And how old was he at the time that he knew about Paul Klee?
He was like 5 or 6.
And he knew about Paul Klee?
Yeah.
Whoa,
Oh, I know. We
what a
were
very
stunned.
precocious, bright child he was.
Yeah, I could tell you some other funny stories about him, but I
Another
won't
time.
at another time.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's I do have an image of that piece I could show.
Now, what I think touches me in you're expressing certain aspects of your own journey of how you started out with watercolor. At what age did you kind of, and then I'll get into some information about myself. What age, you said in your 20s that you were working with watercolors, and how long did you work with watercolors? For how many years approximately?
I would say a good 3 to 4 years. Um, I even sold some of them at an art fair once at the University of Rochester, so that was kind of fun.
That's
Um,
great.
yeah, yeah, it's nice to have it appreciated and be able to show it to a lot of people.
And so when you say 3 or 4 years you work with watercolor, where did you gravitate and transition to? With what material and what medium did you use after that?
I pretty much moved into working with oil on canvas primarily. Um, I'll back up just a step because before I did that, I also was experimenting with an oil black ink on paper.
Hmm.
And I found that really satisfying. And I had, it wasn't quite so abstract at this time. The images that were, um, and I'll say revealing themselves because it seemed to be a whole different process, um, were quite figurative, were very figurative. And at the time, I was working up in my attic and I had a whole kind of ritual up there. It was kind of a very sacred space to me, which I think was very integral to the work. Um, when I went up, I had a bowl of water there before I walked into the area that I painted in, and I could wash my hands. And something about that was um, seemed to help prepare me. And then I had some like a plastic hanging down, and I would walk through into the other area. And I would do some warm up exercises, just letting my hand move across the page and create any kind of image. But and I would say that that was primarily the um, transition into oils. Yeah.
So in this black ink, basically your images were black on paper,
Yeah.
and that, which is fascinating because you when we evolve with our presentations, um, the kind of compositions that you've created for a number of years now are rich with variations of color. So at that time, you went from these black um, kind of images, which were kind of flowing across the paper, not with gradations of color, but with the very strong emphasis of lines and forms in black, which is a very interesting kind of a basis of how you evolved. Uh,
Yeah. It's
yeah,
go ahead.
no, I'm going to jump off and kind of piggyback on something you said about a certain hesitance. So if I go into my own, and please, if you have a question, interrupt me. Um, so when I studied in undergrad school, I was fascinated by wanting to study art history, And I also loved the hands-on process of drawing. And I was actually doing more drawings growing up than paintings. And I think that in trying to find a balance between studying art history and going for a degree in it, I wanted to kind of combine the art historical aspect, wanting to know about variations or chronological periods that showed me how people evolved from different cultures. I was always fascinated by the variations of culture
Hmm.
and how, in different cultures, at different time phases, they preoccupied themselves with certain stylistic forms. And of course, you will find um, in Greek and Roman, and also in early Christian art and Byzantine art, and then it goes into the Renaissance. There is a kind of a movement in different parts of the world and in different parts of Europe and in Asia and the Middle East where certain styles become relevant to the society and culture that they're in. But it is termed and coined with a certain kind of a stylistic approach, such as figurative or neo abstract or Byzantine um, or early Christian. And I think that though that preoccupation that I had with art history was one part of my development. And I think what I wanted to do was find a balance of knowing how to make things, knowing how to really focus in and developing images, express myself. And so in undergrad school, I took the art history, majored in it, and minored in fine arts, studio art. When I went further with my studies, I also studied art history, but then I was fascinated by going into the studio classes, which were right across the hallway from the art history. I felt as if I was betraying myself as an art historian and wanting to know how to make visual images. Because when you study art history, you have to maintain a certain kind of a higher order level of thinking to become a philosopher or to become an academician. And for me, it was more the fascination and the balance of knowing history of art and wanting to make art. And so, something what you mentioned touched me because when I went into one of the classes in graduate school where I had a studio class, um, the teacher noticed that I kept on erasing a lot my images of anatomy. And so I got bogged down with looking at the form, but then spending too much time erasing, not trusting myself,
Hmm.
not having that sense of confidence. And that instructor amazed me because he said, listen, find something that you can use that you don't erase. And I remember going to a well known art store in New York City called Pearl Paints at the time. And I was fascinated by all the different felt tip pens and markers. And I said to myself, I'm going to buy a couple of these felt tip pens or magic markers, and I'm going to use them in class. And that was the beginning for me of a certain revelation in the sense that I had the ability to not erase anymore. It didn't permit me to erase, but it gave me the opportunity to become disciplined and to be able to draw a human form by looking at it and trusting my hand to record the image.
It's
And
very interesting, Stephen. Can I ask you a
sure,
question here? Yeah.
sure.
It's a very interesting process. Now, the study of art history that you just mentioned, do you see at all a connection between that mark making at that time, um, and what you discovered with the pens that you were just describing?
I think it's a very, very great question. It's a very apropos question because the timing of your question fits in exactly. Is that um, I was fascinated by Art Nouveau, by the beautiful line drawings of these artists, especially with an Aubrey Beardsley, who only did images of black and white. And I was fascinated by the fact that blacks and whites are not just for shading or for simple contrast, but actually, black and white is also color. And when you create black and white drawings with combinations of gray, it's a whole gamut and a range of color that you're able to produce. So I went from the fascination with Art Nouveau and I concentrated on line, structure, and form without the depth of the form. It was more of a linear configuration and a linear design. And in a couple of lines, I was able to create the anatomy perfectly of a hand, of a face, of the image of a extended foot or the torso. And so I trained myself to be able to see form and put it down exactly how I could perceive it from looking and using my material. And that was a process that I stayed with in blacks and whites for 10 years.
From what you're saying, it sounds like a very you developed a lot of insights during that period of time. It wasn't just a very static exploration.
Yeah, you're right.
Sounds like, yeah, and to develop the kind of ability to capture figurative images with minimal line and is it's very impressive, really, because I know that there are other artists through history who you see their line drawings, images, and you you could practically see the whole figure that was created from that by what those lines are suggesting.
Great point. I'll give you an example, Eric, because it's a very good way of giving the example. There was an artist, a color field artist called Ellsworth Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
And Ellsworth Kelly did these enormous color field paintings in greens and blues and yellows, reds, of what we call biomorphic forms. Biomorphic are these organic shapes that look as if they are parts of a body, but not the body. It's and and I'll just say right now, for me, an abstraction is a detail of the reality. It's taking something from the whole, extracting it, blowing it up, and it becomes a fragment as an abstraction. But what he did was, if you go to the history of Kelly, Kelly did these beautiful line drawings of stems and leaves. That's all he did for a number of years. These
That's
beautiful,
fascinating. Yeah.
yeah, these beautiful organic, natural drawings of plants. And if you see the biomorphic forms on his large canvases, they are a detail of a leaf.
Mm,
They are a detail of part of the stem.
pardon the interruption.
And that was for me amazing to be able to study that, but also know that you can make the journey from something concrete in black and white. And then, if you want to, you can take those detailed images and impressions of drawings and you can recreate them into abstract imagery
Hmm.
using traditional color, as opposed to just color that for me is black, white, and gray. And I'll end right now by saying there was an incredible show at the Brooklyn Museum back in the 70s, 80s that says drawing is painting, painting is drawing.
Mm, hmm.
So what we can do is maybe next time, if possible, try to show each other and the viewer maybe one or two compositions and maybe talk about how it fits into our own developmental journey as creative people and makers of art.
That's
So,
a great suggestion.
so
Because
thank you
there's,
very much.
thank you, Stephen.
Thank you.